Hello, I am Kevin Anderson.
And I'm Adam Okada.
And we are clinical educators and hosts of the Ask the Educator podcast, brought to you by Healthmark, a Getting a company.
Are you a sterile processing technician, infection preventionist, or biomedical engineer? No matter your role, if you're involved in medical device processing, this podcast is for you. Our goal is to equip you with the knowledge and tools for excellence in medical device processing.
Now let's get started. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Ask the Educator podcast. This is Kevin Anderson, your host, and with me, as always, Adam Okada. For this episode, we wanted to dive into a particularly sensitive topic of workplace bullying. So just as a reminder to all our listeners out there, anything that is said on this podcast is the thoughts and opinions of, those of us who are speaking. They do not reflect on our employers at all. So with that being said, I did want to introduce our guest today for this episode. Her name is Katie Belski. And Katie, I just wanted to give you the opportunity to just kind of tell our listeners just a little bit about yourself. I know you are with infection prevention, and that's about all I know. Unfortunately, I did get to meet you in person, which was great at the HSPA and APIC conferences this past year. But I'd love to get to know you a little bit more, just like the listeners.
Hi, I'm Katie Belski. I got my start in healthcare about 23 years ago in dietary. Actually, I was a hostess, spent about a year and a half there, and then transferred into sterile processing as an OR instrument tech. And from there, just progressed my way up. Spent some time in a supervisor manager role with sterile processing and eventually landed in quality. I worked as a quality and patient safety coordinator for the past just shy of 2 years. So I helped with survey readiness, compliance, rounding and sterile processing departments, making sure they were survey ready. I also did a workshop at HSPA for anybody who was able to attend that this year. And then I also just recently transferred into the infection prevention role. It's going on 3 months now.
Excellent. So a lot of diverse background there, but I couldn't obviously help to notice the sterile processing component and then leaping into quality as well as infection prevention. So what a valuable background you bring. And no doubt, I'm sure you've had some experience with this topic. As I was talking to Adam, we were all talking actually, and about how relatable this topic is. Generally, our audience is sterile processing, but it touches infection prevention, operating room people, you name it, hospital administration. The topic of bullying in the workplace, it is a hot topic on SPD social media. There have been several studies showing how prevalent it is in the industry. What do you think contributes to the prevalence of bullying in sterile processing and in the healthcare environment as a whole?
I think one of the primary things that contributes to bullying is just a lack of information or lack of training. I feel like often it can come from a place of discomfort or insecurity when one team member is bullying another. It can be to take the focus off of them and onto somebody else. I've even seen where staff in sterile processing pre-sterilize lax and then we'll open somebody's tray and sabotage it and then lock it back up to a pre-sterile. So I think in those situations, it's just really making sure you're educating your team and that they're all on the same page, what their understanding is. I think another important piece, though, is making sure that you have a leader that's present, door open policy, and is engaged and inviting. Typically, I've seen in departments that have absent leaders, those are usually the ones that have more bullying happening. So I think it's so important to make sure that if you're a leader listening to this, that you're making sure you're rounding with your team frequently. And if you're a team member, making sure that you touch base with your leader often.
I like what you said about if somebody's not having a lack of information or those kinds of things, because we talk about this a lot in sterile processing, where the tendency to eat our young, quote unquote, that's what we do. When somebody new comes into the department, the older set or the more experienced staff will start to bully them. They don't know as much as, oh, you don't know, kid. You're like, let me show you how it's done. And that's really not a good environment to create a welcoming culture, right? You want to have new people because new people means that there's more people to share the work. So it's unfortunate, but it does happen. I see it all the time. What do you think are like the psychological effects of bullying in the workplace, when somebody comes in and is getting bullied, or if you have a toxic workplace culture, what does that do to a person?
I can say from firsthand experience some things that I had felt. It definitely gives you headaches or you leave feeling more burnt out. And then it also contributes to attrition in the department, like not just with myself, because then I would go home and look for other jobs thinking I cannot stay in this environment anymore. And other team members are absorbing that energy too and doing the same thing. So then it also puts more stress on you, like when you're going to work and another team member is calling in sick because they can't deal with it. Now you have more work to do while you're there.
There's so many different basically little avenues you could go down in terms of the effects of bullying in the workplace. Um, I I don't know if you know, Katie, but my background was operating room, and there is a tremendous amount of pressure on every single person, both to please the patient and to please the surgeon, to get them in there on time, wheels in, wheels out on time. And then the turnovers on top of that have to be real short as possible. And then take that a whole step further if you possibly can, is to, go shorter than is possible. You know what I mean? And so the pressure cooker that is the operating room tends to breed a lot of this. There's limited pieces of equipment similar to sterile processing. Sometimes maybe there's only one insulation tester or one washer, and you got two people in decon, whatever it is. And now you're kind of fighting over the remaining equipment because you want to show your doc that you can keep the room going and all of this stuff. And so there was a lot of contempt and unfortunately a lot of bullying in the operating room. And additionally, this is not necessarily a good thing, obviously, but sometimes that bully could be your manager, right? I have experienced that. I'm not going to point out any names, of course, but unfortunately, that has happened. And for those people that may be dealing with a situation like that, unfortunately, you probably have one of two avenues there, and that's either to report it and to see what happens, or to leave. But unfortunately, because people are afraid of ramifications, they tend not to report it. And I do know that because I used to be a manager, and people would come in and be like, this and this and this happened, but don't tell anybody because I don't want to, I don't want anybody to come after me or whatever. So I'm sure that there's a lot of people out there that can relate to all of this. But what's an interesting thing, I think, to think about is maybe some of the financial implications, because this is something that our leadership, our administrators should really be coming down pretty hard on, considering there could be some serious financial implications, right? So what do you think? And have you seen or had any experience with even the financial implications of bullying in the workplace?
I've seen how it can affect the financial situation. Firstly, just by staff attrition and turnover, having to rehire and retrain staff and then dedicating somebody to work alongside them and training them will also affect the department productivity. But then also it contributes to errors. So when you have somebody that's coming into work and they're distracted by the bullying, or I've even seen it and experienced it myself, where you have a team member who is bullying by using information gatekeeping, and they're keeping most of the information that's needed to keep the patient safe to themselves because they want to be the go-to person, and how that contributes to just error after error or a delay in service. It has a domino effect of financial implications.
I think it was Nancy Tobin did a study on that several years back, where she was talking about the cost of training a new employee versus keeping your old employee, and the cost over time. You're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars over time to replace all these people over and over again, just because you have a toxic workplace culture. What do you think is something that we can do to start to move in the right direction, to start to fix some of these problems? Because we know in a lot of sterile processing departments, and there's probably going to be some listeners out there who are nodding their heads right now, there is that toxic workplace culture of, I don't want to be here anymore. What can we do to correct it? If the manager comes in and feels that culture, because it's something you can, I know Kevin knows this too. We walk into departments sometimes and you can feel the tension in the room. you can feel that sort of toxicity. So what can we do to fix some of those issues or start to fix it if we feel that stuff?
A good leader will be able to recognize that right away because they'll also be present and visible in the department. It's the leaders that are hands off and aren't as visible. I think there's opportunity there. Make sure you're developing yourself as a leader by attending courses or even reading books that help with leadership and communication. There was a really good book that was brought to one of our HSPA conferences several years ago. She was a presenter there, Sherry Harley. She has a book, How to Say Anything to Anybody, and it's awesome if you're somebody that struggles with communicating with team members or a leader that struggles having those crucial conversations with a toxic coworker. Sometimes it might be, and often can be, your superstar employee that's exhibiting the toxic workplace behavior. So it can become difficult to have that conversation with them because you don't want to lose them from the team, but you also don't want that to continue. And then I also think it's important to consider training. So somebody who's been there for 30 years might have a whole different idea of how sterile processing should flow than a new hire. So maintaining consistent training for everybody so that they're all on the same page and communicating effectively. And also for the OR, a lot of the bullying that I'd experienced, especially as a leader, came from OR staff to myself. So they also need to be on the same page. I can't have one tech telling them they can have a tray turned over in an hour and a half because they felt intimidated. And then another tech, they come down and say, oh, it'll be 3 hours. I'm sorry, I'm not sure why another tech told you that. And then a whole thing ensues. We've all been there. So just having a broad understanding that everybody's on the same page with, yes, we're going to tell them it's a 3 hour turnover time and that they're not getting different answers, and building those relationships that are based on trust with the OR so that they know that they can trust the department.
Oh my gosh, so many great points in there. And one of the ones that really resonates with me a lot that you mentioned is the leadership. And I think that there's a lot of challenges with becoming a leader in healthcare. A lot of times what happens is it's, an expert sterile processing tech or an expert OR nurse. And then, they're given this opportunity of promotion. And now they're going from something that they're maybe an expert at to something now that they're a novice at. And you have to learn leadership skills. So that's why I'm so happy that you mentioned leadership being a huge component of that. You have to be self-aware and to understand that those are some skills you need to sharpen if you're going to take that seat. And you absolutely should. You should try leadership. Maybe you'll have a little bit more understanding of the challenges, all of those things that they're dealing with. Some of the push-pull between upper administration and their own staff. There's a lot of dynamic there, but more often than not, the tone of a particular OR is set by the surgeon, and that tone trickles down to everyone. So then if it is one of those sort of bullying and pushy surgeons, then you start seeing, anesthesia is amped up and they're pushing people, and the scrub is amped up and they're pushing, you know what I mean? And then it trickles down to sterile processing. Oh, I need this case, and I need the case card's not ready. Things are missing. And then each OR's stealing trays and instruments off each other's case card, when they're not watching. I mean, there's a whole dynamic to it that really comes and circles back around to leadership. But I think is really interesting about leadership, I used to think it was managers only. But what's interesting about leadership is I think you can be a leader without the title. And we need people like that who are confident in their skills and their knowledge and are willing to stop the line and able to and empowered to by their administration. You know what I'm saying? And so anyway, all of that to say, fantastic points. I can't agree more with what you said. And I'm wondering too, before we kind of get to your final thoughts on this, is, have you had any sort of like personal experience with this where it was kind of directed at you? I know I shared with you before we started this podcast as I've definitely been on the receiving end. But hopefully I've never been on the giving end of that. But I can't say without 100%
Kevin,
certainty.
you're very unpleasant. I've been on the receiving end from you a number of times, but
well, thank you for adding that, Adam, and improving my self-awareness there. Okay. But Katie, have you had any experience like that where it's actually been directed at you?
I have, all the way to the point from when I was a department leader and I had people filing false complaints about me to Joint Commission and the state were coming in, and I ran my department in a very organized way. So I'm like, nope, that's right here. Here it is for you. So it really can come from anywhere. And this was from another leader. So I suspect from another leader, with the information I had, you can kind of follow the trail and tell where the information might have come from. So it really can come from anywhere. I think it's so important for everybody to sharpen their toolbox, as you were saying earlier. So know how to respond to somebody that functions that way. And what I always just try to tell myself is it's more of their problem than it is yours. So they're taking it out on you, but at the end of the day, I know I was doing my job correctly. I know my team is doing their job correctly. And it says more about that person and maybe what they're dealing with personally or professionally than it did about my team or myself.
Early on in my career, I had a leader that was a bully, and it's hard when you have somebody that's above you that is the bully and says things behind people's back and spreads rumors and that kind of thing. So it's difficult in any situation. I think it's specifically hard when a leader does it or when another leader possibly in another department does it. So I definitely understand where you're coming from, and this is such a great topic. I feel like we could go on literally for about an hour, 2 hours talking about bullying and sharing stories about it. But we do need to kind of wrap up here. So Katie, do you have any final thoughts for the listeners on bullying or just anything in general?
My final thoughts for the listeners is to just make sure you advocate for yourself and you're constantly going to work being the best version of yourself, reminding yourself that you're there for the patient and you're not there to participate in that behavior. And if you're in leadership, make sure you're rounding on your team so you recognize that it's going on and that you take it upon yourself to address it. It should not be the responsibility of the team to address bullying amongst the team members. They should be a part of the solution, but it should not be put on them to solve that problem. That's the responsibility of the leader to make sure they have an effective culture amongst their team.
Katie, thank you so much for sharing your experience. I know I kind of put you on the spot there a little bit, asking you about a personal story, but we appreciate it. It just, it's one of those things I think everybody can relate to. And like Adam said, I'm sure we could talk for a very long time, but hopefully what we accomplished here is add a little bit to the conversation, but giving some of those things for the listeners to kind of take to heart and maybe identify some of the things that are going on. Like you mentioned, gatekeeping information. That's a big one. I know it was in our OR. Sometimes people like to be the hero, or maybe they like to be the preferred scrub or the preferred circulator or whatever. And so maybe they gatekeep information. And that's something that maybe if people were more aware of, they identify it for what it is and be able to address it. And that goes for the local managers and leaders and all of that. So hopefully we gave some people out there some practical sort of things to take away and some things to think about and maybe some things to get better at. So I appreciate your time and you coming and sharing your experience with us.
Thank you.
All opinions expressed on this episode are those of the presenters. This podcast is for informational purposes only.
Before using any medical device, it's important to review the manufacturer's instructions for use and consult with a professional.
For any questions or feedback, please reach out to us at asktheeducator@hmark.com.